Hey, Slay Nation, it's your host, Heather, back with another episode of the So She Slays podcast. I have Sarah Murphree in here. I gave her a little tease in the offline era because I was like, I bet so many people call you Sarah Murphy. And it's Sarah Murphree.
You got it, Murphree.
We got it, Murphree. She is an author, actress, and a mental health advocate. Y'all are going to have to forgive me because I'm probably going to be popping cough drops in between this interview. Your girl is on the rebound from a stupid cold that's lasting so long that it's really starting to age non-gracefully. And honestly, you know, when you start getting old is when that cough freaking lingers. So kind of over it. Anywho, I digress. Sarah, thank you so much for being here with me. You and I met briefly at a premiere of Molar, which is a film that you're associated with that I had the pleasure of acting in. But we're here to talk about your book that is being considered for a Pulitzer, which is holy shit. That's like wow. So tell me about your book. Tell me about how you came to even write such a story.
Yes, great question. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yes, so the book is called I Am Human Too. This is what it looks like.
Woohoo.
Woo! Yeah, it's so wild to me that this book is out now. But basically, the book is a true story about the 2 years of my life I spent with the unhoused to better understand mental health and why people end up on the street and can't get off. After my own mom was diagnosed with a mental health condition, and this fear developed in me that what if she ends up on the street? How could I help her get off? What could I do? And yeah.
I feel like that is I feel like I scroll through TikTok sometimes, right? We all do. But I come across these stories every once in a while because there is a few organizations out here in Los Angeles that really help the unhoused. The Brown Bag Lady is somebody who So She Slays has partnered with, donated to, so on and so forth. But there's a lot of kids who have that same thought about their own parents, right? And I can't think of the person right off the top of my head, but I've definitely seen those where it's like, you know, he's following his mom and he's trying to make sure she's okay. Do you have food? Do you have water? Like all the necessities. And I approached you at the film because you had gotten up and you were speaking about your book. And Molar, the film has some aspect of like unhoused elements in it and like the character and so on and so forth. But I really wanted to talk to you about this book because I feel like we are at a little bit of a crossroads with people who like society, it's not getting better, right? So I feel like this problem's not going away. But I also feel like we do a real good job at trying to ignore it. So talk to me about this.
Yeah, that's an amazing perspective. And I think because this problem of people on the street just growing, I think a lot of us have become a little desensitized to it. And even when I was growing up, you know, a lot of the adults, teachers around me, just kind of the perspective was like, don't look at homeless people, stay away, they're dangerous. And, you know, I think after my mom was diagnosed with a mental health condition, she began to exhibit behaviors like if she was triggered by fear, she would have an episode. I didn't even know what an episode was, and it was very frightening as a child to see. But the only other person I ever saw have an episode was a homeless person. And that heightened the fear that, oh my gosh, mom is doing the same thing they're doing, which when you have an episode, usually you're triggered by a traumatic memory. You talk to yourself, you know, you could yell at the wall. Like I think many of us have seen homeless people do this, but I was starting to see my
Girl,
mom
so
do
many
this.
times.
Yeah. So I I think what I would, first say is I began to really relate to these people. I was told, like, don't look at, they're dangerous. And, this heightened fear was like, my mom does this. She only would have these episodes in front of her children because she felt comfortable with us. And so nobody had ever seen them, for years. It was just my brother and I would see these episodes. And so that fear just heightened of like, if mom does this in front of the wrong person, like, could they call the cops? Like, what would happen? Because I think there's so much fear around what's going on. So when I began this journey of spending time with people who are unhoused, I really began to see and learn, and almost every single one told me, they are so much more afraid of us than we are of them. And I remember, I have
That's
so many.
insane. That is not anything that I would have ever thought.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating is, it's like till this day, I tell this a lot to people. Like, I can't necessarily remember like a friend's birthday I went to a few months ago at a restaurant, but this journey began 10 years ago. Until this day, I remember like every conversation, every word I ever had with these people. And, one of my great hopes of this book is that if we begin to see these people as humans with a story to tell, as opposed to a collective, the fear really starts to dismantle. So, you know, when these people became my friends, they were no longer like unhoused. They were like, oh, that's Jerry. Oh, that's David. Oh, that's Jennifer. Like these, people really became my friends. And once I learned their story, I couldn't just look at them as an unhoused person. They really were like, oh, Jennifer was abused. Oh, David didn't have health insurance for a month. Then during that month, he broke his back and it cost him $100,000. Like, I think what most people don't realize is at the time I wrote this, only 25% of people had a mental health condition on the streets, and 75% had an entirely other story to tell. And there were so many stories wrapped around injuries as well, and just that moment someone didn't have health insurance.
Wow.
Um,
So you're telling me
yeah,
that like at that time, which when was this?
10 years ago, I
Okay.
first began this
So
journey.
you're telling me that like a lot of those people, because I think the stigma, the stereotype is like
Mm,
they're on drugs. That's how they got there.
mm,
I would have never guessed it's because a lack of health insurance,
mm.
which led them to like have no money to live.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what I, really hope from this book is in this book, it tells like the 14 unexpected lessons of wisdom. And it really dives into these 14 homeless people, their life stories. And of these 14 homeless people, only one of them has a mental illness. And the rest, I think another, like for instance, one woman ended up on the street really from grief. And I've volunteered and had various jobs with unhoused organizations since I've written this book. And that was another layer of like so many young people on the street. I find they end up there after like their mom died when they were 21 and they just couldn't function and they plowed through the money. And I think what's so timely about this book being published now is this was written as a little girl who like feared my mom being homeless. But this book has come out, um, it came out after my dad died. So my dad died over a year ago. And I never understood, like, how could a young person be on the street because their parent died? Like, I know you love your parent, but then my own dad died and I really couldn't function. I just was so sad. And I immediately was like, oh my gosh, now this book is like relevant to my own life as an adult because grief just consumed me. And
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so I think it is so hard hitting to where people don't realize how easy it is to get
mm,
there, right? I feel like a lot of times we speak from privilege because that we have a community
mm,
or we have somebody to fall back on, right?
mm,
And it sounds like a lot of times that these people don't. right?
Mm,
It's like my community's gone, aka my parent died.
mm,
um the person that I rely on is gone. um I feel like a lot of this comes down to money,
mm.
and then like unfortunate circumstances that just literally line up, and then it just wipes you out.
Totally. And it's so interesting you say that about family because, you know, a lot of the times when I would ask these people their story, I'd be like, oh, do you have an aunt or a son? And there were so many of them who, you know, were only children and they never had siblings, just very small families, and there really was nobody. And I think another layer to this is what I honestly didn't realize until these, you know, talking to people who were really on the streets is the foster care system. In America, when a child's 18, if they aren't adopted, they're on their own. And so many young people on the street were from foster care, and they would tell me like they never even had anyone because nobody ever adopted them.
That like
Oof.
breaks my heart. For those who don't know or who hasn't followed this podcast at all, foster care is a very, very personal thing to me. I have four nieces and nephews that were adopted.
Mm,
Three were in foster care.
wow.
Um, they're all siblings, so we were able to keep
Mm,
them together. Um, but the there's like this huge gap that happens in that foster care arena where it's like, oh, you're 18, okay, you're an adult, toodles.
mm.
And I just want everybody to take a moment and think back to when you were 18. Um,
Yeah.
I would no, like just no. What the fuck am I gonna do? What am I doing at 18? Nothing.
It's
Okay.
real.
I'm ditching high school is what I'm doing. Like I'm trying to get out early. I'm
Yes.
driving to freaking Carl's Jr. or some shit. Like you gonna try to tell me I'm an
Right.
adult at 18 and now I gotta
Mhm.
supply my everything? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, hello.
Mhm.
So there's just ain't no way. And I had
Mhm.
all the help and all the privilege in the freaking world. So it's just one of those situations where I think there's so many circumstances that lead people to live on the
Mhm.
street, and you cover four, like how many is it, 14 different lessons, but were they from how many people?
Mm. I interviewed dozens and dozens of people, but in the end, 14 made their way into this book. And based on what you were saying earlier, how I think the assumption is everybody's on drugs. I think statistically, only like 30% of people on the street are on drugs. But what is so interesting is somebody asked me, like, did everybody want their story told? And I found like every person I met on the street was desperate for me to interview them. And they were desperate to be heard. And I remember talking to these people, and so many of them had said, like, no one's asked me about my life in 10 years. Like, I haven't told anybody anything about myself. And, you know, and so that really just broke my heart too. So to speak about the whole essence of the book is like my great hope is that people read this and they feel inspired to become friends with somebody who is
Mm.
unhoused because it is such a huge problem. It can feel overwhelming and like I can't do anything. I don't know what to do. Um, but I think if each one of us befriended somebody, I because what I found, like every single person who I spoke to, what they wanted most was a friend.
Oh,
And I remember a few people told me, you know, sometimes they beg for change on the side of the road, just hoping somebody will ask their name. I know.
shit, Sarah.
I know. I mean, I know. It breaks my heart. And I mean, I don't know what it's like to go years without really having a conversation with a person, but
Yeah, we do. Well, I mean, we know how to go and live in isolation for a
that's true.
year.
That's true.
Like,
Which, yeah, I think loneliness is like another huge epidemic we have. And I think I have been severely lonely at times, and you know, I have a roof over my head. So,
yeah.
so many of them feel that same way.
I feel like it's so interesting because the one thing that they want is the one thing all of us are scared of.
Mm.
You know what
Wow,
I
that's so
mean?
powerful. Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
one thing that they crave and that they want, meaning
Mm,
they unhoused,
mm.
that they're asking for is the one thing that all of us are so scared to give.
Wow.
Um, because we don't know,
Mm,
like, I mean, think about, we talked about fear, right?
mm,
We talked about not really understanding um, or having any insight into
mm,
how somebody gets to this position, right? The only thing we see is they're dirty, they
mm,
smell, sometimes they talk to themselves,
mm,
sometimes they start yelling at people, some people have gotten attacked. Um, all of these negative things, right?
mm,
And I feel like people, and rightly so in some cases, where they're just like, how, like
mm,
how do I even become friends with someone who is unhoused
mm,
when I I don't even know how to read them. I don't even know like what to do, what to say. They're just gonna ask me for money, and maybe I don't have that much to give, or you know what I mean. And so I feel like everybody's defenses automatically go up. And it's so interesting that you're just like, after interviewing all these people, all they really wanted was somebody just to sit there and talk to them,
mm.
to like ask them about their life and their story and like this, that, and the other, to actually give a shit. Because that's the thing is like the streets, I'm sure you've heard it in the stories that you've heard. You know, it hardens people. It has
Yes.
to. I mean,
Yeah.
consider where you're living.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so it's like it's a product of your environment. So my thing is like, what do we need to do? And maybe
Mm,
this is where we can kind of lean into some of the lessons,
mm,
because I think you're right. Your book, you said this several times on your website. This book isn't about homelessness. It's about humanity,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
So like my thing is, how do we see the humanity and
Mm.
like let go of somebody's fear, and see past somebody's circumstance?
Yes, that's such a powerful question. And I have a little story to that. You know, when I was writing this book, there were many moments I got very discouraged. I was like, what I feel I'm trying to write and do may just be too big. What if nobody cares was a deep fear. What if nobody, understands the story I'm trying to tell? So about 8 years ago, I got very discouraged about this. Like, who's going to care? And I had got a virus on my computer, and my boyfriend at the time, now husband, worked in tech. Oh, you got a virus? Let me fix it. And he found this folder on my computer called the Homeless Book. And he's like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, I wrote this book. I was so passionate about it, and I got discouraged. Would anybody care?" And it feels like such a huge thing to try to put out in the world. And he was like, "Well, can I read it?" I was like, "Sure." And he read it that night, and my husband's from Dallas, and he'd never interacted really with a homeless person in his life, and he was very much taught, you don't look at them, they're dangerous, stay away, avoid them at all costs. And that's what he did. So he read this book, and he and he's a very reserved person. He's not, I think we may think like, oh, an extrovert's going to go out there and talk to the unhoused, but he's very, he's a little more shy. So he read this book, and he woke up the next day, and he was so distraught, and he was like, oh my gosh, any one of us could be them. And the next day he was walking home back to our apartment, and there was a unhoused person near the bus stop. And I don't know what prompted, well, Eric later told me he'd read this book, and he said something in me said like, try to be their friend. So he invited this person to have lunch with him. And so he sat down at Pizza Rev and bought him a pizza. And he sat with that man for 2 hours and heard his whole life story. And that was 8 years ago. And till this day, Eric talks about that man all the time. It was like, that man's perspective changed my life, and he really shouldn't be on the streets. And I just couldn't believe what happened to him. And But I think too, when I had learned that Eric, who was probably the least likely person, just because of how he was raised, and because he's a little more reserved, like asked a man on the side of the road to have lunch with him. I was like, that is my great hope, is that when people read this book, they realize like if you feel uncomfortable, that's okay. You probably will because, as you mentioned, and I think too, it's just hard for us to be around people who are suffering. Humans in general, it's hard to look at somebody who's suffering right in front of you.
Mm.
And, but I do believe that reading this book will help dismantle that fear. And if you sit down with a person and ask them to lunch, I think you'd be surprised, A, how many will say yes, and B, what not only that conversation will do to help their lives, but help your own.
So speaking of helping your own and helping them and all that kind of stuff, what were some life-changing perspectives that you walked away
Mm.
from when writing this? Because if you talk to, I mean, I can only imagine. I've been interviewing people for like 13 years by this point.
Wow.
Like
Wow.
I'm in the thousands of
Wow.
interviews, right?
Yeah.
I've been doing this for a minute. But not to like it's caused me to really learn
Mm.
things,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Have these different types of conversations with people from all
Mm.
over. And it's really reflect made me reflect on my life, how I think, what I do. So I
Mm.
know, and not every single interview that I've talked to is hard hitting and like heavy and all of this
Yeah.
kind of stuff, right? Like it's not like that. Um, but this is a totally different ball game. So
Hmm.
you've had to learn. So I mean, how has this shaped your life?
Yeah, I mean, wow. I think too, one thing I learned is sitting down with these people. Each one exposed me to a law that kind of trapped them there.
Mm.
And so in all these 14 stories at the end, there's a section called Homelessness Insight where they really expose me to like the law that trapped them there. And I've heard this many a times that once you fall below the poverty, the hardest position in the world is to get over that line. And, for instance, at the time this book was written, there was a law um, that if a homeless person was found sleeping on a park bench, they were fined $500. And so there's one story in this book where this homeless couple has thousands of dollars in fines. But to contest that fine and say I'm unhoused, the court sends you your court date and time to go contest that. They don't have an address. And so they would tell me, we didn't even know where to find the ticket to go contest it. So if you have thousands of dollars in unpaid fines and the cops show up at any time, check your name, you're immediately arrested for unpaid fines. And so that was very fascinating to learn that, like, wow, some of these people in jail are being arrested, like, just couldn't pay their fine because they fell asleep on the park bench and they don't have an address to even understand where to go contest the ticket. I mean, there's so many little things like this I discovered that I was like, oh my gosh, you really are. So that particular couple I spoke to was just like, we don't even stay in shelters because the risk of seeing a police is too high. So they learn to camp in the woods and survive that way.
That's so interesting. Okay.
I
This
know,
is
it's
like
like
there's so many things
yeah.
going on in my head right now that I'm trying to figure out what direction I want to head. And that's why I'm like
Okay.
there's very few times in an interview where I'm like, damn, what direction do I want to head with what she just said? This is one of those times. Um I Okay, let's go in this direction.
Okay.
We're gonna head in this
I'm
direction
ready.
because the only thing I can kind of think of too, right? We've all seen it. And I think it's one of these situations too where it's like we have to fight the generalization
Mm.
of the people who are unhoused and the stereotypes that come with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We already mentioned like drugs, but people who, use the streets as bathrooms, people who, you know, I mean, like that's just, there's so many examples that I'm sure people can like think of, and in which they've seen. I mean, I grew up in a small farm town. We didn't really have a whole lot of homeless people growing up. I was much like your husband,
Mm-hmm.
right? We didn't really have a whole lot of people. Um, I moved to San Francisco, totally different story. Lots of unhoused. That was like my first for real experience with that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And then when I moved to LA, I was like 5 blocks from Skid Row. So definitely saw things. I think the first time I went down Skid Row was by accident. I had just moved
Wow.
to LA and I was like, oh shit, where the fuck am I?
Yeah.
Because it's the wild, wild west out there.
Mm.
And it has its own laws and own rules and all of that stuff. It's like a totally different zone. And so it's like it's so hard to combat this, right? Like I'm
Mm.
hearing all of these, like your examples, and we're going to talk about the lessons that like really change your perspective. But I know so many people are just like, Heather, girl, you're trying to tell me to be friends with someone. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
there's so many people listening to this be like,
Mm.
girl.
Mm.
So I feel like I want you to tell me, because I know you probably come up against this argument. I
Mm.
want you to tell me what made this sink home to you enough for you to
Mm.
totally change your perspective, right? We talked about your mom a little bit. Was it the lessons in the book? Was it
Mm.
these people? Like, what is it that really flipped your perspective?
Yeah, I guess, that's a great question. I think once I became friends with them, I just really, it was hard for me to look at them as like homeless people. And I think, to what you were saying earlier, growing up, to me, it's like, well, are they all have a mental illness? Are they all on drugs? I even heard that, growing up from various adults in my life, oh, they're just a bunch of drunks that don't want to work. I heard
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Like they
Mm-hmm.
just don't want to get a job. And that seeps into your worldview as a child. Like, okay, maybe they're just lazy. And I think, after my mom had her mental breakdown, it's like, my mom is not lazy. She's traumatized. And so I think what was so interesting is when I sat down with them and learned their life stories, what I was like first blown away by is how few of them were a drug addict or were an alcoholic or were lazy. And what I was in awe about is how relentlessly almost 90% of them tried to get off the street. And it
Mm-hmm.
was just so hard. And it wasn't just the laws that trapped them there. It was, the lack of family, the lack of like one couch to sleep on for a few months. And I think what most people don't realize is so many of them do have jobs. Um, Rather that be often work. I mean, many of them worked at like a fast food restaurant, and working full time there is not enough to pay rent anywhere.
No, no. Which
So,
is a totally other discussion in general, because how you
yeah,
can
yeah.
work full time and not have enough money to at least keep a roof
Ooh,
over your head is a totally different
yeah,
subject. Um, yeah,
yeah.
that can go off in a different
Mm.
direction. What
Yeah.
what are the lessons in this book
Mm.
that hit you the hardest?
Yeah, I think what I love about this book is there's 14 lessons, and when people read it, they always have one that like they can't stop thinking about that just
Mm.
sits with them. So I believe they're really, you learn so much in these lessons, but there's one that just like, oh my goodness, you can't stop thinking about. So everybody I've spoken to has a different one. For me, this man, David, is somebody I actually think about him every day.
Mm.
I know it's like, oh, it's gonna make me cry because I just loved him. But he reminded the lesson he taught me was about depression.
Mm.
And he was a man. He was a loving father. He worked as a painter. He was one of the people that he fell off a ladder painting a Victorian house, and he didn't have health insurance at the time. And surgery cost him $100,000. And he couldn't walk for 10 months. So he couldn't work for 10 months because he was bedridden. And he was immediately in debt $100,000. And he literally thought if I like sell my home, he owned a home, and pay off this debt, it'll be better to be debt free. And that's what he did. And he still struggled to work because now he was disabled for the rest of his
Yeah.
life. And that's how he eventually ended up on the street. And, you know, he deeply struggled with depression and the loss of this life he could have had because he did have a happy marriage and he had two children. And he stayed on his ex wife's couch for a while. And I was like, so she was housing you, why didn't you stay there? And he said something, I'll never forget what he said. He goes, when you end up like this, you just try to stay out of everybody's way. And, that broke my heart because he was like, I mean, he looked like Santa Claus. He just had the most joyful, cheeriest face. And so, anyway, all this to say, he had a daughter about my age and a son. And at the time, which was so wild to me, I was a senior in college when I did this. His son was a senior in college at the same school. And I remember
Wow.
thinking after I spoke to David, as I'm in this, I was a journalism major, I'm in this class, and somebody in this room, perhaps that's their dad, I just spoke to on the street. And but the reason, he was deeply depressed, which had stifled him in many ways. But I remember him telling me, when you're deeply depressed about something, and he was so depressed about the loss, this beautiful life he could have had, this great dad he could have been for his daughter. And I remember him telling me, you remind me of my daughter, and it's comforting to be around you. And this lesson, I remember thinking, like, this is a powerful thing to say, and for some reason, I just never could forget it. So, um, when my dad died, I remember thinking I loved being around David because and that was his name, David. He reminded me of my dad. And so, even though I learned this lesson from him 10 years ago and my dad died a year ago, it's like really seeped into my life that when you lose something you love so much and it leads you to be depressed, and David really taught me this, the only thing that can really take you out of that is something that reminds you of that thing you loved that you lost. And
Mm.
so, I think he felt that because I reminded him of his daughter he didn't talk to because he was ashamed. And he reminded me of my dad, who's now passed. And so now that my dad passed a year ago and was very close to my father, I have found like I feel great comfort in people who remind me of my dad. And I really learned
Yeah.
that from this man on the street who lost everything.
Oh my goodness.
These are all
I feel
so
like,
tragic.
but it's like,
Yeah.
here's the thing. It's like, okay. I feel like, yes, it's tragic.
Mm.
And you feel for people. You really do.
Mm.
And I think it's one of those situations, though, that like, I know that like not everybody wants to listen to something like
Mm.
this, right? Um, but the thing is like it's these stories
Mm.
that humanize, right?
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
these stories that make you see past a circumstance.
Mm.
Um, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just it really brings that relatability aspect into
Mm.
things, right? Because you're not going to tell me no one's ever had some sort of like level of depression or was
Mm.
sad about
Yeah.
something or
Yeah.
lost something that they loved dearly.
Right.
That's a human experience.
Right. Yeah.
You're not going to tell me that.
Mm.
Um were there any, like, I want to give a little bit of a taste of like what are some other lessons that people can find in your
Mm.
book, because the thing is I think your book, um it it has the power to really change
Mm.
like some actual mindsets. And so we gave a little bit of a taste as
Yeah.
far as like what hit you? What
Mm,
about your husband? What about other people that you've heard where they're just like, hey, so and so, when I read their story,
mm.
I was like, wow.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I mean, some of the lessons in this are a lesson on gratitude, resisting peer pressure, forgiveness, PTSD, a lesson on the American dream, friendship. Um, I think recently a screenwriter read this book and he told me he can't forget this man's story named Sean. And Sean's lesson is on the American dream. And Sean was somebody who's like, he's like, I was raised like I get a good job, I get a home, I have a wife, I have a kid, I have a 401k, and he
Mm-hmm.
did it. And he was very miserable. And,
Mm.
I remember him saying, the more I work, the more I drink. And he was from New York. And his story is very fascinating because, as he told me, he was raised in New York, no cars. Drinking was his way of life, his culture. We don't have to worry about that. So he moved to Tennessee to relocate, and he ended up getting a DUI,
Mm.
and his license was suspended for 6 months. And he ended up getting, which is so wild, he got a second DUI. And at the time he got a second DUI, he was drinking at a bar that was 2 minutes away from his house. And he thought, if I drink too much, like I'm literally 2 minutes away. And in those 2 minutes, he got pulled over and got a second DUI. And that's eventually what spiraled him. And his story was so fascinating because he said, how I drank in New York was not a problem. It was a problem when I moved to Tennessee and had to drive and realize, like, so then, his story was so fascinating, as if you're raised in a culture of drinking, like you worked on the stock exchange market, you work hard, you
That's a
play
thing.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So his story was very fascinating because I knew many people in my life who were work hard, play hard, drink, go out. Maybe they drove home once. The only difference was Sean got caught. And he was young when he got caught. He was like 37. And
Wow.
that story I found has set with men particularly because, as Sean says in his story, he's like, I achieved the American dream and I was not happy. I thought, oh, this is when happiness happens, when I get my own home. And so that phrase really sticks in my mind. The more I work, the more I drink. And I think, too, his story taps into a lot for men because he said he had a big group of friends. And he said, I knew all my friends' favorite football teams, but I didn't know anything going on about their home life.
Mm.
And,
That is definitely a topic happening in today's
hmm,
mental health circle, when it comes to men
yeah.
and having community and relationships
Mm.
and actual conversations that, have some weight behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that's so interesting. I feel like,
I think too, some
yeah.
of these people, they didn't always look unhoused to me. When I met
Mm,
Sean, I really thought he was like a graduate student at the college I was going to. And
really?
so I think that was interesting also, is when I met people who didn't appear to be unhoused and the great lengths they went to try to not look like a homeless person. And I think also, I say this too, on the cover, there's like this little
Yeah.
flower.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that there because even though most of these stories are like, oh my gosh, that happened to me, or a friend, or somebody close, I guess what I'm trying to say is that spending time with people on the street is really not as depressing as an endeavor as it seems.
Mm.
And in fact, I found people who've lost everything tend to have this very deep, rich sense of humor. And so even in this book, there are a lot of nuggets of laughter because these people were so funny and they were honest, and spending time with them really wasn't like a
This
weight of
downer.
heaviness. They were very life-giving, and I found it so refreshing to be around people who were so bluntly honest.
Mm. I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Do you have some examples? Or do you have an example of like one of the nuggets of humor that has set with you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think Well, the first story in this book is about a homeless couple, and their names are Jane and Leonard, and they have a problem with alcoholism. And they're the ones who lived in the woods because
Mm.
they got all these fines for sleeping in the park and they couldn't pay them off. So they ran the risk of always being arrested because they had so many unpaid fines. And they were like, just think of the odd couple. They loved each other so much, but they were so funny and just so aware that they were tipsy when I was with them. And they would be like, Jane would be like, "Oh, you're drunk, Leonard," and Leonard would be like, "Well, you're more drunk, Jane." And it was a little like, "You're drinking a fifth of whiskey. Where you bought two Bud Lights?" It was kind of like, I mean, it felt like you're sitting with your mom and dad, just like bickering. And
Bickering.
then at one point, Jane was like lost her flip flops during this particular interview because she was so drunk. She wanted to just dance. Well, Jane, your flip flops, they're not even, they were on opposite feet because she was so tipsy. Oh my gosh, you can't even put your shoes on right. It's like, I don't think we think that people talk like this because sometimes it's like, oh, they're so mentally unwell. But I found no, they were so similar to like a bickering parent who like loved each other, but
Hmm.
like, it
Hmm.
was like, oh, we're just going to address that we're okay, we drink too much, and now we're all just gonna like, I don't know, they just have a laugh about it in a way.
Yeah. That's so, I mean, gosh, refreshing. I feel like refreshing is a good word for
Mm.
that. I think I haven't read your book. I know it's on pre-sale right now, right? Or is it?
It is now off pre-sale. As of today, yeah, it's off.
Ooh, as of
Available.
today. As of we're recording this like early, so y'all, November 5th is when we're recording this. So it's available. Now, where's it available at?
It is available on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble. Yeah, you can get it today. Order it straight to your home.
Oh my goodness. I always like to wrap up these interviews and leave with a little bit like I'm a doer, all right? I'm a doer. I'm an action driven person.
Uh,
Um, but I feel like this is such a ginormous topic, issue,
mm,
problem, seen throughout the world, seen throughout, wherever it is that you're living. Um, I mean, we have lots of money and lots of people in power who have not been able to even
mm,
try to attempt to fix this, try to attempt to do anything. Um, what do people do? Like, what do
mm,
and I feel like I'm not necessarily asking like how do we fix this ginormous problem because like you said, it's so layered. How people
mm,
got here. There's several paths to this destination. So I'm asking, what does somebody do
mm.
on a micro level to kind of help address or to make an impact of some sort?
Yeah, that is an amazing question. And yeah, I think my whole hope is that this book really inspires people to just befriend one person on the street. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there were periods I got discouraged trying to put this in the world because it felt so overwhelming to help everybody. And I think in the world, we continue to see so many unhoused people that sometimes it feels like, oh, what can one person do? It's overwhelming. I'm shut down. So my great hope is that if we all just tried to befriend one person, ask them to coffee, ask them to lunch. I think oftentimes, wherever we're living, there's maybe that one person we pass every day or someone we've seen more than once. And, you know, I, I think if every one of us befriended one person, amazing things would happen. And, you know, there are people on the street who are in dire need of more help and maybe not capable of having a lunch with a person, or maybe they are so far into a drug addiction they won't even be able to talk. So I don't think one person can save everybody, but I think one person can help one other person. And I think that ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
can hopefully maybe shift the narrative of how we see people who are on the street.
I love that. On that note, where can people find you, follow you, all the things?
People can find me. I'm Sarah Murphree, Murphree. um, yes, people can find me on Instagram. My website, Sarah Murphree. I All my contact info is on the website. If you want to reach out to me, you can DM me on Instagram, and the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Honestly, this was like a really good conversation, and I think one that is so timely. And Slay Nation, if this conversation hit home, made you think, made you stop and kind of maybe show a little bit more gratitude for where you are in your journey. I recommend Sarah's book. I haven't even read it yet, but I'm definitely gonna get it. I feel like it's one of these books that it's gonna make you learn a few things about yourself. And I, as always, on So She Slays, that's one of the main things that we encourage the most is self-awareness. You got to learn about yourself, right? So if you like these conversations, definitely share this episode, but all the other stuff that you can find on SoSheSlays.com. So She Slays across any social platform. You can watch this dang thing on YouTube too. We're everywhere. So She Slays. Give it a Google. We're number one. Rate, review, like all of that kind of stuff. And as always, Slay Nation, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, we'll catch you later.